On screen, she was untouchable. Off stage, she belonged to no one, but the contracts demanded everything. Between the camera's gaze and her own face in the mirror, Claudia Cardinale spent decades asking one question that would haunt her into old age. Whose life was she actually living? The public saw only what was permitted: the face, the body, the image sculpted by men in suits who controlled every frame, every gesture, every word. They never saw the woman behind it. The truth would not emerge until decades later, whispered in interviews and finally written into her own memoir. By then, she had already sacrificed nearly everything to discover it. Her beauty was her prison. Her talent was her cage. And the only way out required becoming someone the studio system had never planned for her to be. Claude Josephine Rose Cardinale was born on April 15, 1938, in La Goulette, a Tunisian port city near Tunis, where her Italian railway worker father and Sicilian mother had carved out a modest, discipline-driven existence. This was not a house where tenderness was currency. Her father, Francesco Cardinale, worked for the Tunisian railway as a technical engineer, a man of routine and rigid expectation. Her mother, Yolande Greco, carried Sicily's traditions in her voice and her unbending rules. Claudia arrived into a household where the children, two older brothers, Bruno and Adrien, and a younger sister, Blanche, were raised under a system of absolute authority. Discipline was law. Softness was a liability. Punishment was swift and severe. The message was relentless. The world does not reward weakness, so do not be weak. Do not cry. Do not complain. Do not expect mercy. Your parents' severity is not cruelty. It is preparation for a world that will be far worse. Then, at 17, everything shifted in a way that would alter the trajectory of her entire existence. The Italian embassy in Tunis held a beauty contest, a competition for the most beautiful Italian girl in Tunisia. Claudia entered, not because she desired it, but because it seemed like the kind of safe, conventional thing that a girl her age was expected to attempt. She won. The prize was a trip to the Venice Film Festival in 1957, an all-expenses-paid journey to one of the world's most prestigious film events. Suddenly, this girl who had never thought about cinema, who had never desired fame, was standing in Venice watching films and being watched by people who saw in her face a marketable commodity. A French director named Jacques Baratier noticed her there and offered her a role in his film. She refused. He persisted. Other offers came. She refused those too. She explained clearly. She was not interested in cinema. She wanted to finish her studies. She had plans that did not involve cameras or contracts. But the film industry in Europe in the 1950s was a machine designed to grind down refusals, and Claudia Cardinale, at 17, was not yet equipped with the language or the power to say no with permanence. Meanwhile, Franco controlled the machinery of her silence with increasingly elaborate contracts. He crafted documents so detailed they dictated not just the films she would make, but the clothes she would wear, the friends she could be seen with, the things she could say in public, the places she could be photographed, even the hairstyles and colors she was permitted to maintain. If she violated any clause, penalties could be extracted. If she tried to leave, she would be sued into oblivion. Claudia described it years later, in interviews with painful, precise clarity. I was no longer master of my own body or thoughts. I was completely controlled. I was no longer able to make decisions about my own life. Everything was in the hands of Vides. Even talking with a friend about anything that could make me look different from my public image was risky. As if it had been publicized, I would have been in trouble. For 7 years, she kept Patrick's true identity secret from everyone. From the public, from the press, from her own extended family, from colleagues, and even from Patrick himself. The shame was hers to carry alone. What sustained her through these years of suffocation and lies was something undeniable and pure. She possessed genuine talent. Her very first film, Goha in 1957, was a French-Tunisian production where she shared the screen with Omar Sharif, and it barely registered at international box offices. But by 1958, when she appeared in Mario Monicelli's I Soliti Ignoti, something else became visible on screen that transcended mere beauty. It was intelligence. It was gravity. It was an earthy, grounded quality that Italian cinema had not known it wanted. Luchino Visconti saw it immediately. He cast her in Rocco and His Brothers in 1960, and suddenly the Italian film industry understood. This was not just a beautiful woman. This was an actress of substance. When she played Nadia, a prostitute caught between two brothers in a tale of working-class tragedy and family breakdown, audiences witnessed depth that exceeded the script itself. Yet even her own voice was deemed unacceptable. Studio executives determined that her French-Italian accent was not marketable to Italian audiences. So her voice was dubbed by another actress. Even her own words did not belong to her. The machinery of publicity churned relentlessly. In 1963 alone, newspapers devoted nearly 29,000 articles to Claudia Cardinale. She was photographed constantly, her beauty analyzed in meticulous detail, her body dissected in print, her private moments transformed into public commodity by photographers and journalists who believed they had a right to every inch of her. Every aspect of her appearance was commodified. She was marketed, packaged, and sold to audiences who believed they knew her because they had seen her face. When she appeared in Blake Edwards' The Pink Panther in 1963, she was cast as a perpetually drunk Russian princess, a supporting role that felt, in retrospect, like a message about her place in the hierarchy of cinema, her place in the system. Other actresses like Sophia Loren, like Brigitte Bardot, had found ways to demand autonomy within the system, to speak back to studios, to refuse total control. Bardot, 4 years her senior, had become a symbol of women's liberation. But Claudia remained trapped in the amber of Franco's vision, unable to refuse, unable to speak, unable to exist outside the precise frame that had been constructed around her. She was not yet equipped to rebel. Yet, beneath the submission, she was thinking. In a July 1966 interview with Life magazine, she made a small crack in the facade. She confessed her terror of becoming over-glamorized and exploited the way other European actresses had been in their careers. She spoke openly about her fear of becoming a cliché, of being rendered invisible by her own image, of losing herself entirely to the machinery of fame. "If I have to give up the money, I give it up," she told the interviewer, with surprising firmness. "I do not want to become a cliché." That same year, without her permission or knowledge, her photograph appeared in the gatefold of Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde album. She did not control her own image even in its most public manifestations. When she demanded its removal, the studio removed it from later pressings. But the damage was done. Even Bob Dylan had felt entitled to use her face. The studio's response to her growing anxiety about her autonomy was not to negotiate or to listen, but to escalate control. In 1966, Franco married her in a secret ceremony, a marriage designed to possess her legally, to bind her contractually and spiritually, though the ceremony itself was never made official in Italy and was barely acknowledged. She was married off, like property being transferred between owners, like an acquisition being secured. The films continued to be extraordinary and artistically significant. Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, released in 1968, stands as one of cinema's greatest achievements, an operatic western that redefined the genre entirely and created a new language for how westerns could be made. Claudia played Jill McBain, a widow and former prostitute, who becomes the moral and spiritual center of Leone's universe of violence and greed. That role is one of her finest performances. Intelligent, powerful, self-determined. Jill does not ask for permission. Jill does not apologize. Jill reclaims her agency and her dignity within a landscape designed to strip both away. It is, in retrospect, a kind of unconscious prophecy about what Claudia herself needed to do with her own life. She was making films about women reclaiming themselves while being denied any voice in her own life. The irony is almost unbearable. She was playing liberation while living in captivity. Then came Pasquale Squitieri, and everything changed. An Italian film director appeared in her life in the mid-1970s, and in his presence, something shifted fundamentally. Unlike Franco, who had discovered her and controlled her with the authority of a creator over his creation, Pasquale was someone Claudia chose. This was the difference that would remake her life. The attraction was immediate and transgressive. Franco was still technically her husband, though their marriage had become a fiction designed to control her. For a time, Pasquale was married to someone else. The affair was tempestuous and increasingly public, and Franco's response was explosive. He threatened suicide. He threatened to destroy her career utterly and permanently. He attempted to blacklist Pasquale from Italian cinema, and temporarily succeeded. Squitieri was forbidden from directing films as punishment for the transgression of loving Franco's wife. Industry connections moved against him. Doors closed. Productions were canceled. But this time, Claudia did not retreat. She did not apologize. She did not sacrifice her own happiness to preserve Franco's image or ego. For the first time in her adult life, she chose her own future. In 1975, at 37 years old, Claudia Cardinale left Franco Cristaldi and moved into a life with Pasquale Squitieri that would sustain her for 42 years, until his death in 2017. Pasquale is the person I've shared everything with, she would say in interviews decades later, looking back with the clarity that only time and genuine love provide. I was the one who chose him. I was the one who decided to win him over. I went to New York. That simple phrase, I chose, contains the entire architecture of her liberation and self-reclamation. With Pasquale, she had a daughter, also named Claudia, born to a relationship built on mutual choice, rather than contractual obligation. She lived in Paris with her family, part of a genuine domestic circle, rather than a branded image maintained for profit. The money mattered less now. The roles mattered less. The paparazzi and the publicity machines and the studios that wanted to own her mattered less. What mattered was that her body belonged to her, that her decisions were her own, that she was no longer standing in someone else's shadow, wearing someone else's face. She would explain her decision not to marry Pasquale, despite their 4 decades together, with characteristic honesty. The memory of the violence I suffered weighed on me. Plus, I've never liked mixing public and private life. That's just how I am. I'm a tomboy. As a girl, I didn't want to be an actress but an explorer. In 2000, at 62 years old, Claudia Cardinale was appointed a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for the defense of women's rights. The irony was deliberate and profound. She had spent her youth as a victim of a system that valued her beauty above her autonomy, her image above her voice, her utility above her humanity. Now she used whatever platform and authority remained to advocate for the opposite, for young women to own their bodies completely, to own their choices, to own their futures. She spoke about the Armenian genocide in Mayrig. She spoke about women's education and rights in the Arab world, drawing on her Tunisian roots and her Arab heritage. She spoke about water rights and environmental protection. She became visible not as an icon, but as a thinker, a woman with opinions and moral positions. She became an advocate. The photographs from her later years tell a story that the cinema sometimes obscured. In her youth, Claudia resisted the seductive poses that photographers demanded. She didn't strip on screen. She avoided scandal. She kept her private life private, not because she was naturally reserved, but because she was forced to be. Because the system demanded that she remain an image, perfect and untouched and forever young. As she aged, she refused the thousand small erasures that women in entertainment are pressured to perform. She refused cosmetic surgery. She allowed the gray to come into her hair. She did not dye it, did not fight it, did not pretend youth was anything but past. Aging naturally, she insisted, was an act of self-respect and dignity. Patrick, her first son, eventually learned the truth, though not from his mother. A journalist named Enzo Biaggi discovered her secret and reported it publicly, forcing a disclosure that should have been Claudia's alone to make. The discovery came when Patrick was around 8 years old. The shame surrounding her pregnancy, the secrecy, the lies, the presentation of her own child as a sibling, spoke to how completely the machinery of 1950s and 1960s cinema had colonized women's bodies and reproductive choices. A woman's fertility was seen as a liability to her career, something to be hidden or erased, something that threatened her marketability. But Claudia survived it. Patrick survived it. They built a genuine relationship as adults. Patrick became an actor himself, and the circle of family reconnection completed itself. The hidden child of a controlled woman became a visible artist in his own right. Claudia's daughter, with Pasquale, also named Claudia, grew up outside the spotlight, eventually taking on the role of her mother's archivist and collaborator on a documentary about her life. Franco Cristaldi, the man who had controlled the first half of her life, died in 1994, more than 15 years after their separation. His death came without the dramatic flourish that might have seemed fitting for the story. Pasquale Scitieri, the great love of her life, died in February 2017 at 78 years old. Claudia grieved privately, as she had lived with him, outside the machinery of public spectacle, outside the reach of journalists and studios. She continued to work, continued to speak at film festivals, continued to use her voice for causes she believed in. In 1993, the Venice Film Festival honored her with the Leone d'Oro alla Carriera, a Lifetime Achievement Award presented, alongside recognition for Robert De Niro, Steven Spielberg, and Roman Polanski. The honor came late, as these honors typically do, but it acknowledged what had always been true. She was among cinema's finest interpreters. If stories about women reclaiming their lives from the machinery of power and control speak to you, if you're interested in the hidden costs of fame and the extraordinary resilience required to survive systems designed to diminish you, if you want to understand the golden age of cinema from the perspective of those who lived through it, subscribe for more documentaries about the artists who lived through Hollywood and European cinema's golden age and emerged not just as survivors, but as their own people.